1 year after divorce, Korean Mafia boss finds a baby on his doorstep with a note from his black ex. Seriously, when I first heard how this went down, my heart actually stopped. It's one thing to leave a man who is the most dangerous person in the country, but to come back like this? It is truly shocking. If the sight of a mother giving up her only hope just to save her baby's life moves you, hit that like button. Subscribe right now and let us know your city and the time you're listening, because the secret in that note is about to set the city on fire. Now, to understand the drama, you have to see Sophia Reynolds. She was standing in the shadows of the massive stone pillars of the Jung estate. The rain in Seoul was coming down like it wanted to judge the whole city. It was cold, sharp, and felt like needles against her skin. Her arms were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the weight of the only thing she had left in this world. Exactly 1 year ago, Sophia had signed the papers that ended her marriage to Jung Dae-hyun. She walked away from the man she loved, the Dragon of Seoul, thinking she was finally free. She looked down at the small bundle in her arms. Little Seo-jun was fast asleep. He had his father's nose in her eyes. He was a perfect, tragic blend of two worlds that were never supposed to touch. She thought she could hide him. She thought she could raise him in some quiet corner of the world where the name Jung didn't mean blood. But she was wrong. The shadows always find you. About 12 hours ago, everything fell apart. Sophia was leaving a clinic in Incheon when she saw a black sedan with tinted windows. No matter how many turns she took, they were there. Then the burner phone in her pocket buzzed. It was a voice that sounded like cold gravel. It was the leader of the Iron Lotus, the man who had been hunting her for months. "We know where the boy is, Sophia," he said. "Dae-hyun can't save a ghost, and he certainly can't save a son he doesn't know exists." That was the moment she knew her time was up. She couldn't protect him alone. She stepped out of the tree line and walked toward those massive oak doors. Every step felt like her heart was being crushed by a heavy weight. She reached the welcome mat and knelt down. She tucked a thick manila envelope into the baby's blanket. It had the DNA test, the records, and her final words. "Grow up strong, my little star," she whispered. Her voice was just a broken mess. "The world thinks your father is a monster, but for you, he will be a god." She reached out and rang the bell. The sound was so loud it felt like it was screaming her name. Then, she did the hardest thing ever. She ran. She hid in the dark woods across the driveway and watched. The door swung open, and the golden light from inside hit the wet stone. There he was, Jung Dae-hyun. He was wearing a white suit that looked perfect. He looked cold and untouchable. But then he looked down. For the first time, the powerful dragon of Seoul froze. His mask broke. He didn't call for guards. He just dropped to his knees in that expensive suit to touch the miracle he never expected. Watching Dae-hyun on his knees was like watching a mountain crumble. This was a man who had never shown a single drop of emotion in public. Yet there he was, reaching out with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. He picked up the bundle so carefully, as if the baby were made of thin glass. Then he saw the manila envelope. I could see the exact second he read that note. Even from my hiding spot in the trees, I felt the temperature in the courtyard drop. His face went from shock to a type of heat that made my blood run cold. He didn't just look angry. He looked like he was ready to watch the world burn. He pulled Seo-jun against his chest, using his own expensive jacket to keep the rain off the baby's face. He looked straight into the darkness where I was hiding. He knew. He always knew when I was near. But before he could speak, the peaceful night was shattered. A second car, a dark SUV with no plates, roared into the driveway. I recognized the symbol on the side immediately. It was the Iron Lotus. They hadn't followed me to kill me. They had followed me to wait for the one moment Jung Dae-hyun was distracted. And they found it. The back windows of the SUV rolled down, and I saw the flash of metal. "Dae-hyun, look out," I screamed, my voice tearing through the sound of the rain. I didn't think about the fact that I was supposed to be a ghost. I didn't think about the divorce. I just ran toward them. The first shot hit the stone pillar beside me, sending chips of rock flying. Dae-hyun didn't panic. He didn't drop the baby. He pivoted his body, tucking Seo-jun into the crook of his left arm and pulling a heavy silver gun from his waistband with his right. He stepped forward, putting himself directly between me and the shooters. He was a living shield. He started firing back with a speed that was terrifying. Every shot he took was steady and calculated. I felt a hot, sharp pain across my shoulder as a bullet grazed me, spinning me around, but I kept moving until I hit the porch. "Get inside the house, Sophia. Now," Dae-hyun roared. His voice wasn't the cold, robotic tone I remembered from our final day together. It was raw. It was the voice of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. I scrambled past him into the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sound of his security team swarming the yard was like a wave of thunder. Bullets were flying, glass was shattering, and the baby started to cry. A sharp, high sound that made Dae-hyun's eyes turn into something not human. He stayed on that porch until the SUV was a smoking wreck at the end of the gate. He didn't care about the danger to himself. When the shooting finally stopped, he walked into the house and kicked the door shut with his boot. The locks clicked into place, one after another, sealing us in. He stood there, his white suit ruined and stained with blood, looking at me with an intensity that made me want to hide and run to him all at once. He walked over to a plush chair and gently laid our son down before turning his full attention to the blood soaking through my sleeve. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just grabbed my arm, his grip possessive and firm. "You're hurt," he whispered, his eyes scanning my face as if he were memorizing every inch. The dragon was back, and this time, he wasn't letting go. The heavy steel gates of the Jung estate didn't just close. They sealed us into a world where the rest of Seoul no longer existed. Within seconds, the entire property was crawling with men in black suits, their movements silent and efficient. Dae-hyun didn't wait for his medical staff. He carried me into a private study that smelled of old leather and expensive scotch, placing me gently on a velvet sofa. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp. He moved with a focused, quiet intensity that was honestly more intimidating than the gunfire outside. He grabbed a first aid kit, his movements steady as he began to cut away the ruined silk of my sleeve. "Before we go any further, I have to ask, if the way he stepped in front of those bullets for her moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and tell us your city and the current time where you are listening. Seriously, stay tuned, because what he's about to reveal about those divorce papers is going to change every single thing you thought you knew about this man." The room was so quiet I could hear the rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall and the frantic thudding of my own heart. Dae-hyun's face was a mask of concentration. He didn't look at my face. He focused entirely on the graze on my shoulder. His fingers were warm against my skin, a sharp contrast to the freezing rain still dripping from my hair. He cleaned the wound with a clinical precision, his touch surprisingly light for a man who made his living through violence. He didn't ask why I came back. He didn't ask about the baby yet. He just worked. "You should have stayed in the car," he said finally. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in the small space between us. It wasn't a scold, it was an observation. "I couldn't let them hurt you," I whispered. My voice felt thin and fragile. "They were going to kill you, Dae-hyun, and they were going to take Seo-jun." He stopped then. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a level of intensity that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. "Nobody takes what is mine, Sophia. Not then, and not now." He reached into the pocket of his ruined white suit and pulled out the manila envelope I had left on the porch. He didn't open it. He just held it, his grip so tight his skin was pulled taut. "I signed those papers," I said, trying to find some ground to stand on. "I left because you told me I was a distraction. I lived in fear for a year because you said you didn't want us." Dae-hyun stood up, moving to a heavy safe behind his desk. He punched in a code and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He walked back and dropped it into my lap. I looked down, my breath catching in my throat. It was the original divorce decree I had signed a year ago, but the section for his signature was blank. It was unsigned, untouched. "I never filed them, Sophia," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low octave. "I let you believe you were free so the Iron Lotus would stop looking for a target. I made myself look like a monster so you would run far enough away to be safe. But I never let you go. You were never my ex. You were always my wife." The room felt like it was spinning. All that time I spent hating him. All those nights I spent crying alone in that small apartment in Incheon. He had been keeping this secret. He had let me live in pain just to keep me alive. It was the most beautiful and most messed up thing anyone had ever done for me. He knelt back down, his hand coming up to trace the line of my jaw. "The sanctuary is back in place now," he murmured. "And this time, the only way out of these gates is over my dead body." Waking up in that massive bed felt like a dream I wasn't supposed to have. The sheets were the same high-thread count silk I remembered, smelling faintly of the sandalwood soap Dae-hyun always used. For a split second, I forgot about the black sedan, the gunshots, and the blood on the porch. But then the weight of reality hit me. I sat up, my shoulder throbbing with a dull ache, and looked toward the corner of the room. A hand-carved wooden crib had been moved into the master suite while I was sleeping. Dae-hyun was there. He hadn't changed out of his clothes. though he had removed his jacket. He was sitting in a high-back chair right next to the crib, his long legs crossed at the ankles. He wasn't sleeping. He was just watching Seojun breathe. The morning sun was starting to peek through the heavy curtains, casting a pale light over his sharp features. He looked exhausted, but he also looked like a man who had finally found his missing piece. Seeing this feared mafia boss, a man who could end a life without blinking, sitting in total silence just to guard a sleeping infant was the most controversial thing I had ever seen. "He has your spirit," Dae-hyun said, not taking his eyes off our son. He didn't cry once after the guards took him. He just watched them, like he was waiting for the right moment to strike. "He's a baby, Dae-hyun," I said softly, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. He wasn't looking for a moment to strike. He was probably just terrified. Dae-hyun finally looked at me. There was no coldness in his eyes this time, only a deep, heavy exhaustion that made him look human. "He's a young. He knows when he's in the den of the dragon. He knows he's safe now." I walked over and stood beside him, looking down at Seojun's peaceful face. It was hard to reconcile the violence of the night before with the stillness of this room. We had lost a whole year. 365 days of first steps, first words, and quiet mornings that we could never get back. I felt a surge of anger mixed with the relief. "How did they find us?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. I was so careful. I changed my name. I moved 3 times. I didn't even use a bank account. How did the Iron Lotus know exactly where we were yesterday? Dae-hyun's expression shifted instantly. The soft fatherly look vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating mask that sent a shiver down my spine. He stood up, towering over me, his presence filling the room. "That is the question I have been asking my security leads for the last 4 hours, he said. "My men are loyal. Or at least, they are supposed to be. But the Iron Lotus didn't just stumble upon you. They had a digital map of every move you made for the last 3 weeks. He walked toward the balcony, looking out over the sprawling estate. "Someone inside this house told them where you were. Someone I trust has been feeding information to the very people who tried to kill my son on my own doorstep." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The fortress wasn't as safe as it looked. We were trapped inside with a snake, and Dae-hyun knew it. He turned back to me, his eyes hard. "I will find them, Sophia. And when I do, I will ensure they regret the day they were born. Until then, you do not leave this room. You do not talk to anyone but me. Is that understood?" It wasn't a request. It was a command. The silent vigil had turned into a hunt. The atmosphere in the grand dining hall was thick enough to choke a person. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a trial. I sat there, my spine straight, holding Seojun. Across from us sat the 7 elders of the Jung Syndicate. They didn't see a mother and her child. They saw a problem. They saw a woman who didn't fit their image of a mafia queen. One of them, a man with a face like crumpled paper named Elder Park, didn't even try to hide his disgust. He looked at me, then at the baby, and then finally at Dae-hyun. "You bring this distraction back into our house." After a year of silence, Park's voice was like sand on glass. "The bloodline must be pure, Dae-hyun. An heir should come from a union that strengthens our alliances, not from a failed romance with a foreigner who brings trouble to our gates." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It was the same old story. 5 years ago, they tried to frame me to get me away from him. Now, even with his son in my arms, they were still trying to delete me. But I didn't look down. I didn't cry. I looked Elder Park right in the eye. I had survived a year on my own in Incheon. I wasn't afraid of an old man in an expensive chair. Dae-hyun was leaning back, his hands resting on the table. He hadn't said a word the entire time the elders were complaining. He just watched them through the steam rising from his tea. But when Elder Park mentioned the word pure, I saw Dae-hyun's jaw tighten. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. "Is that all?" Dae-hyun asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Park scoffed. "It is enough. The boy cannot be the heir. We have other candidates from families who actually belong in our circle." Dae-hyun stood up slowly. He walked over to Elder Park and leaned down, whispering something directly into the man's ear. Whatever he said made the elder's face turn a ghostly shade of white. Dae-hyun then turned to the rest of the room. "Seojun is my son. Sophia is my wife. Anyone who questions their place in this house is questioning my judgment. And we all know what happens when my judgment is questioned." He turned to a guard. "Elder Park is tired. Help him pack his things. He will be spending the rest of his retirement in a small village far from the city. If he ever steps foot in Seoul again, make sure it's the last thing he does." The room went silent. The other elders looked at their plates. That was the power of the dragon. He didn't need to scream. He just needed to be decisive. He walked back to me, placed a heavy, possessive hand on my shoulder and looked at the remaining men. The next person who speaks about my family without respect will join him. Before we move to what happened when we were finally alone, I have to ask you something. If you've ever had someone stand up for you when the whole world was against you, you know how Sophia felt. But do you think Dae-hyun is just protecting her, or is he marking her as his property for a much darker reason? Hit that like button, subscribe right now, and tell us your theory. If you stay for the next part, you'll see the terrifying thing she found in her old apartment that changes everything. You don't want to miss what comes next now. After the elders scurried out of the room like rats, the silence was heavy with everything we hadn't said. Dae-hyun led me back to our private wing, but he didn't stop in the bedroom. He took me to his private office, a place where the walls were reinforced and the windows were bulletproof. He sat me down and pulled up a file on his computer screen. It was a collection of photos and surveillance logs from the small coastal town where I had been hiding for the last year. "You thought you were alone, Sophia," he said. His voice was thick with a mixture of guilt and a rage that felt like it was simmering just below the surface. But the Iron Lotus was never far away. "Look at this." He clicked on a photo. It was a grainy shot of my apartment building in Incheon. There was a man standing near the entrance, wearing a delivery uniform. He looked normal, just another person doing his job. But then Dae-hyun zoomed in. On the man's wrist was a small, faded tattoo of a lotus flower wrapped in iron chains. My stomach did a slow flip. That man had delivered my groceries at least twice a week for 6 months. He had held the door open for me when I was struggling with the stroller. He had even complimented Seo Jun's eyes. He was there the whole time, I whispered. The realization that I had invited a predator so close to my son made me feel physically sick. I thought I was being so careful. I thought I was protecting him. Dae-hyun walked over and knelt in front of me, taking both of my hands in his. His grip was so strong it was almost painful, but it was the only thing keeping me from shaking apart. "It wasn't your fault. They are experts at being invisible, but they made a mistake. They thought I wouldn't find out who sent him." He stood up and paced the room, his movements like a caged tiger. That man was working for a commander in the Iron Lotus who has a personal obsession with his family. He wasn't just watching you. He was waiting for the moment I finally broke and came for you. They wanted to use you as the ultimate bait. I saw the tension in his hands under the dim light, his fingers clenched into tight balls. He looked like he wanted to go out and destroy the city right then and there. But instead, he stopped and looked at me. "From this second on, your life changes. I'm not just putting guards at the door. I'm giving you a shadow." He pressed a button on his desk, and the door opened. 2 men walked in. They didn't look like the usual Mafia soldiers. They were leaner, their eyes moving constantly, scanning the room for threats. "This is Minho and Young-soo," Dae-hyun said. "They're the best I have. They don't report to the syndicate elders. They don't report to my father. They report only to me. Their only job is to ensure that no one, not even a delivery man, gets within 10 feet of you or our son without my permission." It felt like a cage. A beautiful, expensive, gilded cage. But after seeing that photo of the man with the tattoo, I didn't care. I didn't want freedom if it meant being a target. I looked at the 2 men and then back at Dae-hyun. "Is this how it's going to be? We just live in hiding forever?" Dae-hyun walked over and pressed his forehead against mine. I could smell the scent of his cologne, that familiar mix of expensive wood and a hint of steel. "No," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous octave again. "We aren't hiding. We are preparing. Because before the month is over, there won't be an Iron Lotus left to watch you." I knew he meant it. Most people think the most dangerous part of being a Mafia wife is the bullets, but they're wrong. It's the dinner parties. That night, the air in the dining room was so heavy it felt like breathing through a thick blanket. Dae-hyun had called his 5 top lieutenants to the estate. On the surface, it was a celebration of my return and the safety of the air. But I knew Dae-hyun better than anyone. He didn't do celebrations. He did traps. He sat at the head of the table, looking like a king from a dark story, his eyes moving slowly from one man to the next. I sat to his right, holding a glass of water, my hand steady even though my heart was racing. I was watching every face, every movement, and every nervous twitch. Among the 5 men was Captain Han, the head of outer security. He was the one who was supposed to be watching the gates the night the SUV attacked. He sat there eating his steak as if nothing was wrong, but I noticed something. On his wrist was a new watch. It was a rare, custom piece with a small, subtle engraving on the side. My legal mind kicked in. I had seen that exact design in the evidence files during my internship 5 years ago. It was a gift given only to high-ranking members of the Iron Lotus as a reward for loyalty. My blood turned to ice. The traitor wasn't just in the house. He was sitting 3 feet away from us, laughing at a joke one of the other men made. I looked at Dae-hyun, wondering if he saw it too. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and placed his hand on top of mine. His skin was warm, but his expression stayed as hard as a rock. He started talking about the security breach, his voice low and casual. He was baiting them, waiting for someone to slip up. He even mentioned that I had found a lead in the Incheon files. I saw Captain Han's hand pause for a split second. It was enough. The dragon protects his own, but the greatest danger is already inside the house. This brings us to a huge question that everyone is asking. Do you think Dae-hyun's intentions are pure, or is he using Sophia as bait to catch this traitor? Is he putting her life on the line just to win a war? Hit that like button and subscribe right now if you want to see how this ends. Seriously, comment your theories below, because what happens next is a total game changer. I watched as Dae-hyun leaned in closer to Captain Han. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being friendly, which was much more terrifying. He poured Han more wine and asked him about his family. It was a psychological game, a slow torture designed to make the man break. I realized then that Dae-hyun wasn't just protecting us. He was using our presence to force the snake out of the grass. The tension in that room was so high I thought the windows might shatter. Every time Captain Han laughed, I felt a shiver of fear. He was a killer, and he was sitting right there. But then I looked at Dae-hyun again. I saw the way he was watching me. It wasn't the look of a man using a tool. It was the look of a man who would burn the entire city down if a single hair on my head was touched. He was playing a dangerous game, yes, but he was doing it with a precision that was almost beautiful to watch. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was letting the traitor think he was winning, right up until the moment he decided to strike. It was a silent war happening over expensive wine and fine china. I knew that by the time the sun came up, one of the men at this table wouldn't be breathing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready for the fire. I was ready to see the dragon take what belonged to him. He whispered to me to stay calm and keep drinking my water. He promised that the night would end in justice. I trusted him. I had to believe in us. The best way to destroy an enemy isn't with a gun. It's by taking away everything they think they own in front of everyone they know. 3 days after that dinner, Dae-hyun told me to get dressed. He didn't ask. He just had a gold silk gown delivered to my room. We were going to the National Arts Gala. It was the biggest social event in Seoul, and every person who had ever looked down on me was going to be there. As we walked into the grand ballroom, the music seemed to stop. I felt every eye on me. They remembered the girl who was framed 5 years ago. They remembered the girl who was kicked out of the firm. But then they looked at the man beside me. Dae-hyun didn't look like a businessman that night. He looked like a conqueror. I saw him almost immediately. Mr. Choi. He was the senior partner who had framed me for embezzlement. He was standing near the bar, holding a champagne glass, looking smug and untouchable. When he saw me, his smile faltered for a second, but then he straightened his tie and started walking toward us. He actually had the nerve to try and talk to me. Sophia, he said, his voice dripping with fake kindness. I heard you were back in town. I hope you've stayed out of trouble this time. We still haven't found that missing money, you know. The people around us started whispering. It was a public humiliation, exactly what he had done to me years ago. I felt my stomach drop, that old feeling of being small and powerless trying to crawl back up my throat. But before I could even open my mouth, I felt a heavy, warm hand on the small of my back. Dae-hyun stepped forward, moving so close to Choi that the older man had to take a step back. Dae-hyun didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He just looked at Choi with eyes that were as cold as a winter night in the mountains. Mr. Choi, Dae-hyun said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that carried through the silence. I think you have a short memory. This woman is my wife. Every word you speak to her is a word you speak to me. And I don't like your tone. Choi tried to laugh it off. Dae-hyun, surely you don't know her history. She's a thief. She nearly ruined our firm's reputation. Dae-hyun leaned in closer, his hand tightening on my back in a possessive grip. The only thieves in that firm are the ones I am currently buying out. By tomorrow morning, I will own 60% of your shares. And the first thing I'm going to do as the new owner is turn over your private ledgers to the authorities. Choi's face went pale. He looked like he was about to faint. Dae-hyun didn't stop there. He turned to the crowd, his hand never leaving me. This woman is the mother of the young heir. If you breathe the same air as her again, I will ensure it is the last breath you ever take. Does everyone understand? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the most public, most brutal claim I had ever witnessed. He wasn't just protecting my body. He was protecting my name. He led me away from the crowd, his presence like a wall of fire between me and the world. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a queen. But as we walked toward the exit, I saw a familiar man standing in the corner. It was the man with the lotus tattoo. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. Sometimes the person who hurts you the most is actually the only one trying to save your life. That night, after the gala, the high of the victory faded fast. I was back in our room, but I couldn't stop thinking about the day he handed me those papers. I remembered the woman standing in his office, the one he let me see. She was beautiful, and she looked like she belonged in his world. I had lived with that image in my head for a whole year. It was a poison that made the loneliness even worse. I found Dae-hyun on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. I didn't wait. I asked him right then. I asked him who she was and why he had to make me feel so small just to get rid of me. He didn't turn around at first. He just stood there, his back to me like a wall. Then he finally spoke. His voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. He told me her name was Agent Kim. She was a professional, someone he hired to play a role. He never touched her. He never even looked at her when I wasn't in the room. He staged the whole thing. He made sure I walked in at the perfect time because he knew that if I thought he was just protecting me, I would never leave his side. He knew I was too stubborn to run unless I hated him. He had to become the villain in my story so I wouldn't end up a victim in his war. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. All that pain, all that anger I carried, it was based on a lie that he told out of love. It was the ultimate sacrifice, and it was the most cruel thing he had ever done. I walked up to him and turned him around. I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He hadn't stopped loving me for even a second. He had just been holding his breath for a year, waiting for me to be safe. I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch as if he were finally coming home. It was not a moment of power or dominance. It was just two people who had been broken by the same secret, finally finding a way to heal. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually breathe. We stood there in the quiet for what felt like hours, just holding each other. The tension that had been between us since the doorstep finally snapped, but it didn't break us. It joined us. But just as I started to feel safe, the world went dark. Not just the room, the entire estate. Every light, every security camera, every electronic lock. The hum of the house just died. Dae-hyun didn't hesitate. He pushed me toward the bed and grabbed his phone, but there was no signal. They hadn't just cut the power. They had jammed every frequency. The Iron Lotus hadn't just found us, they had shut us down. In the total blackness, I heard the sound of a window breaking somewhere downstairs. The siege had officially started, and we were trapped in the dark with no way to call for help. The hunt was on. I held my breath and waited for the first scream of many that would likely follow in the coming minutes of this long and painful night of true terror and desperate survival for us all. My son was the target, but Dae-hyun was the one they had to get past if they wanted to touch a single hair on him. Have you ever been in a room so dark you couldn't even see your own hand in front of your face? That was our reality. The estate was a high-tech fortress, but without power, it was just a giant stone cage. I didn't wait for Dae-hyun to tell me what to do. I scrambled across the floor, my heart pounding against my ribs, until I felt the edge of the crib. I grabbed Seo-jun, pulling him against my chest. He didn't even wake up, but I could feel his little heart beating fast. Dae-hyun was suddenly behind me, his hand steady on my shoulder. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the change in his energy. He wasn't the man who had just been holding me a minute ago. He was the dragon now. He guided me through the hallway, moving with a supernatural confidence even in the pitch black. We reached the heavy oak paneling in his study, and he pressed a hidden catch. A small section of the wall slid open to reveal the panic room. It had its own independent power supply, and as the heavy door opened, a dim red light spilled out. It looked like a scene from a movie, but the danger was very real. He pushed me inside and looked at me one last time. His eyes were cold and focused. "Do not open this door for anyone but me," he said. "If you hear shooting, do not come out. If you hear someone calling your name, stay silent." I tried to grab his arm, to pull him inside with us, but he stepped back. He had to stay out there. He had to be the wall between us and the men coming up the stairs. The door hissed shut and the locks engaged. I was alone in that small, red-lit room with my son. I sat on the floor, watching the small monitors that were powered by the backup batteries. The thermal cameras showed heat signatures moving through the gardens. There were at least a dozen of them, all heavily armed. I watched the screen as Dae-hyun moved into the main hallway. He was alone, but he didn't look afraid. He looked like a predator waiting in his own den. He took a position near the top of the stairs, his silver gun glinting in the red light of the emergency sensors. Then, the first team of intruders reached the second floor. I had to cover my ears as the sound of gunfire echoed through the vents. It was a tactical strike, fast and loud. I watched the monitors as Dae-hyun moved with a speed that didn't seem possible. He wasn't just defending, he was hunting them. Every time an intruder entered his line of sight, they didn't get a chance to fire. But there were too many of them. I saw 3 men moving toward the study from the back balcony. They were going to flank him. I wanted to scream, to tell him they were behind him, but there was no way for him to hear me. I sat there, clutching Seo-jun, watching my husband fight a war in his own house. The red light made the blood on the floor look like black ink. I realized then that I had never truly seen the dragon in action. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. He was a man made of iron and fire, and he was the only thing standing between us and the end. I prayed for the first time in years, begging the universe to let him live. I was a simple mother in a high-tech bunker, but I knew that if he fell, the rest of us wouldn't last long in this world. My son was everything to me, and I had to trust that the man I loved would be truly enough. The sound of metal hitting bone is a noise you never really forget. It stays with you, rattling in your brain long after the fighting stops. From inside the panic room, I watched the small monitor with my heart in my throat. The red light made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. Dae-hyun was alone in the hallway, his back against the heavy steel door that protected me and our son. He was a man transformed. Gone was the cool, calm CEO who bought companies over breakfast. In his place stood the dragon, a force of nature that didn't know how to quit. 4 men were trying to get past him, their faces hidden by black masks. They didn't care about the rules of engagement. They just wanted the air. Dae-hyun moved like he was part of the shadows themselves. He didn't waste any energy. Every punch, every kick, and every squeeze of the trigger was done with a terrifying efficiency. I saw one man swing a heavy lead pipe, but Dae-hyun caught it midair, his grip like iron. He twisted the weapon away and used it to clear the space around him. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in heavy gulps, but his eyes never left the stairs. He was exhausted. I could see the way his legs trembled for a split second after he threw a man over the railing. But he didn't falter. He stood his ground like a wall that couldn't be broken. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching him. It was controversial, I know. I should have been repulsed by the violence. I should have been horrified by the way he dismantled those men. But instead, I felt a deep, primal sense of security. This was the man who had pushed me away to keep me safe. This was the man who was willing to die right now just to ensure I could keep breathing. In that moment, he wasn't just my husband or the boss of a syndicate. He was my protector, a silent god of war who demanded respect. He looked into the camera for a second, a quick glance to make sure the light on the door was still green. He knew I was watching. He was doing this for us. Finally, the hallway went quiet. The last of the intruders was down, and the only sound was the heavy thud of Dae-hyun's boots on the carpet. He leaned his forehead against the steel door, his shoulders slumped for just a moment. He was human after all. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his fingers shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I watched his face turn from exhaustion to a cold, hard mask of pure fury. He held the screen up to the camera so I could see it. It was a picture of an older man tied to a chair in a dark basement. It was his father, the retired chairman of the Young Syndicate. Under the photo was a simple message: "We have your father. Trade the boy for the old man, or they both die tonight." I felt the air leave my lungs. The stakes had just been raised to a level we weren't ready for. The Iron Lotus wasn't just attacking the house anymore. They were attacking the very foundation of his life. Dae-hyun didn't scream. He didn't punch the wall. He just looked at that screen with a level of focus that made me realize the real war was only beginning. He tapped on the door, a specific rhythm we had agreed on. I opened the locks, and he stepped inside. He was covered in sweat and blood, but he didn't touch me. He just looked at Seo-jun and then back at me. "The game has changed," he whispered. "And now, we have to do something they don't expect." I knew then that the rescue wasn't over. We were going on the offensive, and the price of our freedom was about to get much higher. We were no longer just surviving. We were hunting. They say knowledge is power, but in my world, a law degree is a tactical weapon that can do more damage than a gun. After the adrenaline of the hallway fight died down, the reality of the threat against Dae-hyun's father set in. The Iron Lotus wanted a trade. They wanted my son in exchange for a man who had built the very empire we were standing in. Most people would have panicked. Most women would have cried and begged their husbands to find another way. But I wasn't most women. I was Sophia Reynolds, and I spent years learning how to track monsters through their paper trails. While Dae-hyun was on the phone with his lieutenants, trying to find the location of the kidnapping, I sat down at his desk. I didn't ask for permission. I just took his laptop and started typing. My fingers moved across the keys with a speed that came from years of late-night study sessions. I wasn't looking for a physical location on a map. I was looking for the money. The Iron Lotus was a huge organization, and a move this big required a lot of cash to pay off guards and buy equipment. They had to be using shell companies to move that money around Seoul without triggering any alarms at the central bank. Dae-hyun walked over, his eyes wide with surprise as he watched me work. He had always seen me as someone to protect, someone who needed his strength to survive. But for the first time, I saw that shift in his eyes. It was a look of pure, raw respect. He didn't try to take the laptop away. He just stood behind me, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. I could feel his heat, a grounding presence that helped me focus. "What are you doing, Sophia?" he asked, his voice low and curious. "I'm following the blood money," I told him. "The Iron Lotus commander who is obsessed with you is arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than the law. But he left a trail. He used a logistics company to rent those SUVs, and that company is owned by a holding group based in the Cayman Islands. That same group just paid a massive utility bill for a building that's supposed to be abandoned." I clicked a final button, and an address popped up on the screen. It wasn't a warehouse or a basement. It was the old law firm where I used to work. The irony was almost too much to handle. The place where my life was ruined 5 years ago was the same place where they were holding his father. It was the place where the Iron Lotus felt the most comfortable because they owned the partners who ran it. Dae-hyun looked at the address and then back at me. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He just leaned down and kissed the top of my head, a gesture that felt like a silent vow of partnership. "You just gave us the high ground," he said. I stood up and looked him in the eye. "I'm coming with you. I know that building better than anyone. I know the service elevators, the back exits, and the security codes that they probably haven't changed in years. You can't do this without me." He started to protest, his protective instinct kicking in, but I stopped him. "You said we are stronger together, Dae-hyun. Prove it. Let me help you take back what belongs to us." He stayed silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face. He was weighing the danger against the truth of my words. Finally, he nodded. It was a power reversal I never expected. I was no longer just the woman in the panic room. I was the one leading the strategy for the final confrontation. We were going back to the place where it all started, back to the lion's den. But this time, I wasn't the prey. I was the one bringing the fire. And with the dragon by my side, I knew that law firm was about to become a graveyard for the people who tried to destroy us. Our time for justice had finally arrived. Walking back into that law firm felt like walking into a grave I had dug for myself years ago. The glass and steel building looked so clean on the outside, but I knew the trash that lived on the top floor. Dae-hyun was right behind me, his hand on my lower back, a constant reminder that I wasn't that scared in turn anymore. We didn't use the front doors. I led him and his team through the loading dock and into the service elevator that the cleaning crews used. It was greasy and smelled like floor wax, but it was the only way to reach the executive level without being seen on the main security monitors. As the elevator climbed, the silence between us was heavy. Dae-hyun checked his weapon one last time, his face a mask of stone. When the doors opened, we weren't met with a reception desk. We were met with 4 guards in suits. The fight was over in seconds. Dae-hyun's men moved like ghosts, taking them down before they could even reach for their radios. We moved down the hallway toward the main boardroom. I could hear voices through the heavy double doors. I heard Mr. Choi laughing. It was that same arrogant, high-pitched laugh that used to make my skin crawl. We burst through the doors, and the scene inside was pure chaos. Dae-hyun's father was tied to a chair in the center of the room, looking tired but still holding his head high. Standing over him was the commander of the Iron Lotus, the man with the tattoo, and right beside him was Mr. Choi. They both looked shocked, as if they couldn't believe we had actually made it past their perimeter. The commander grabbed a knife and held it to the old man's throat, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "One more step and the chairman dies," he screamed. Dae-hyun didn't stop. He walked right to the center of the room, his gun leveled at the commander's chest. The air was so tight I thought I would choke on it. This was the moment everything we had fought for came down to a single choice. The moment of truth has arrived. Justice is a blade, and tonight, it's in Sophia's hands. Stay until the end to see the dragon's final vow. Subscribe and hit that like button because you do not want to miss the choice she makes next. It is the most controversial part of our entire story. Dae-hyun didn't fire. He looked at me, then back at Choi. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a second handgun, a smaller one with a pearl grip. He held it out to me, his eyes never leaving the enemy. He's the one who took your life, Sophia, he said. He's the one who made you a ghost for 5 years. He's the one who tried to steal our son's future. The law won't give you what you need tonight. I will. Choi started shaking. He actually fell to his knees, begging for mercy, blaming the Iron Lotus, blaming the firm, blaming everyone but himself. He looked pathetic. I took the gun from Daehyun's hand. It felt heavy, cold, and real. I looked at the man who had ruined me and realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't a victim. I was the wife of the dragon. I walked up to Choi and placed the barrel of the gun against his forehead. The commander tried to move, but Daehyun's men were faster, pinning him to the floor. I watched Choi cry, his tears hitting the expensive carpet. I thought about the year of loneliness. I thought about the rain in Seoul that night I left Seojun on the doorstep. I thought about every unfair thing that had happened to me because of this man's greed. You told me I was nothing, I whispered. You told me no one would ever believe me. I didn't pull the trigger. Instead, I shoved the gun into his mouth, making him gag on the cold metal. I'm not going to kill you, Choi, I said. That would be too easy. I'm going to make sure you live a very long life in a very small cell where everyone knows you're a rat. I handed the gun back to Daehyun. I had won. I didn't need to be a killer to get my justice. I just needed to show him who was really in charge. Daehyun pulled me against his chest, his heart beating a steady, proud rhythm against my ear. The rescue was finally complete, and the claim was now written in the blood of our enemies. We were finally whole again and ready. The fallout was like a bomb going off in the middle of Seoul's elite. By the time the sun started to rise, the Iron Lotus didn't exist anymore. Daehyun's men moved through the city with a clinical speed, shutting down every warehouse, every office, and every bank account that smelled like the syndicate. It wasn't just a fight, it was a total purge. While the city was waking up, we were still in that boardroom. Choi was sat at the long mahogany table, his hands shaking so much he could barely hold the pen. Daehyun stood behind him like a shadow that wouldn't leave. In front of Choi were the confessions. I had drafted them myself on the drive over. They detailed every bribe, every frame-up, and every illegal deal the firm had ever made. Choi signed them all. He didn't have a choice. The alternative was a one-way trip to the docks, and he knew it. As the last signature was dried, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had been carrying for 5 long years. I wasn't a fugitive. I wasn't a thief. I was finally, legally, Sophia Reynolds again. My reputation was back, but it felt different now. I didn't care about the approval of those men anymore. I had found a power that was much deeper than a law degree. We took the chairman back to the estate. The old man was quiet during the ride, but when we got inside, he did something I never expected. He walked over to me, took my hand in his, and bowed his head. It was a sign of total respect from the man who had built the Jung Empire. You saved this family tonight, he said. My son was right to never let you go. You are the heart of the dragon. I looked at Daehyun, and for the first time, I saw a tear in his eye. He had spent his whole life trying to earn his father's respect, but I was the one who had finally secured it for both of us. The healing started that morning. We spent the day in the gardens, just the 3 of us. Seojun was crawling on the grass, chasing a golden butterfly, while we watched from the patio. The danger wasn't gone forever. In our world, it never is. But the immediate threat was dead and buried. Daehyun stayed close to me, his hand always touching mine or resting on my shoulder. He was still marking his territory, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a promise. We talked about the future, about how we would raise our son to be strong but fair. We talked about the year we lost, and how we were going to make up for every second of it. As the evening light turned the sky a soft shade of orange, I realized that justice isn't always about a court of law. Sometimes, it's about standing in the wreckage of your enemies' lives and knowing you survived. It's about having the person you love look at you like you're the most precious thing in the world. I wasn't the scared intern anymore, and I wasn't the lonely mother in Incheon. I was home. The law of the dragon had spoken, and it said that we belonged together. This was the peace we had earned through fire and blood. It was a beautiful, quiet victory for a family that was never supposed to exist. We were truly strong, happy, and finally at peace in our own kingdom of love today. The final claim of a mafia boss isn't about a white dress or a church full of people who don't even like you. It's a silent, blood-soaked promise that you will never have to stand in the rain alone again. As the sun began to set over Seoul, painting the sky in deep purples and golds, I stood on the main balcony of the estate. I wasn't the woman who had stood trembling in the shadows a few nights ago. That version of Sophia Reynolds was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. Dae-hyun walked out to join me, his footsteps heavy and sure on the stone floor. He had changed into a dark black suit, looking every bit the king of the city. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside me, our shoulders touching, watching the city lights begin to flicker on below us. For the first time in a year, the judge-like reign of Seoul didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the heat of the man beside me and the knowledge that the dragon was finally home. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't his style. He took my hand, his fingers warm and steady against mine. Inside the box was a ring, but it wasn't a diamond. It was a heavy gold band with a custom-carved black stone, the Jung Syndicate seal. It was the mark of the family, the symbol of the dragon. By putting this on my finger, he wasn't just asking me to be his wife. He was making me his equal in every way that mattered in this dangerous world. He was giving me the power to rule beside him. "You were never my distraction, Sophia," he murmured, his voice dropping to that low, melodic rumble that always made my heart skip. "You were my destination. Every move I made, every lie I told, was just to get back to this moment." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it felt like a heavy, beautiful weight. It was the final anchor to my new life. The claim was absolute. I looked at the ring and then up at him. I knew that being the wife of a king like Dae-hyun came with a price. There would be more enemies, more fights, and more nights where we would have to guard the door together. But as I watched him look over at the nursery where Seo-jun was sleeping, I knew it was worth it. Love in our world isn't a soft, fuzzy thing. It's a blade. It's a shield. It's knowing that someone would burn the whole world down just to keep you warm. We had survived the fire, and now we were going to rule the ashes together. The rescue was complete. The revenge was truly beautiful. And our story was just beginning in this city of secrets and power right now. Before we go, I have to know, which part of Sophia's journey moved you the most? Was it the doorstep, the law firm, or this final claim? Tell us your favorite part in the comments below. Also, let us know your location and the time again. Subscribe for the next story in the Jung Syndicate universe, The Bodyguard's Debt. You won't want to miss how the dragon protects his own people. See you in the next big rescue story very soon. Thanks for listening and being part of our world together tonight.